voices and that sort of stuff. Probably just give it a few minutes before we properly kick off. Thanks to everyone joining in. I might just wait another minute or so till we get a few more attendees and then we'll start. Okay, I think we have enough people here to get started. So thank you everyone very much for joining us today. This event is to celebrate the Credible Economist writing competition and our finalists, but in general celebrate that we had this wonderful competition and so many great articles submitted, and to thank everyone who submitted for their great contributions. So I'd like to first acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So my name's Evie Fox-Coob. I'm Deputy Chair of the New South Wales Women in Economics Network, and I've been organising the Credible Economist blog series and this writing competition, along with my committee member, Rhiannon Yetsenga. So as I said, we're here to celebrate the competition, and this all started with the blog series, and the aim is really to promote female voices in economics. So we started the competition really to contribute to this goal and get more public contributions out there written by female economists and also on the topic of gender economics. So we started the writing competition, or we announced it at the end of last year. We had submissions come in around April and then have had a few months of judging and preparing for this event. The competition has 3 finalists who are all here today to present, and then at the end we'll be announcing first, second and third among the top 3. We also have 3 honourable mentions, which we'll be announcing today. The scope of the competition was to write an 800-word article, as I said, either written by a female economist or on the topic of gender economics. And we had 3 evaluation criteria. So the articles had to be accessible and engaging, they had to be compelling and persuasive, and they had to have a strong understanding of economic concepts. I'd like to give a big thanks to our 3 judges who put a lot of time into reading and scoring all the articles. So Leonora Rees, Catherine Fox and Rhiannon Yetsenga. Just quickly on the judging process, the judges all received a de-identified list of blogs and scored them against the criteria, and then met up to discuss really of those which ones they regarded to align with the criteria the most. In general, we received a really wide variety of blog topics. It was super interesting to read articles on poverty, geography, finance, migration, women in politics, just such a great range of articles that we'll be looking to publish throughout the year. So again, thanks to everyone who submitted an article. So the sort of agenda for today is I'll pass over to Leonora to provide some overall comments from the judges reflecting on the competition and to announce our 3 honourable mentions. Then I'll facilitate each of our 3 finalists presenting a little bit about their blog, so what they wrote about, why they were interested in the topic, and a bit on their writing process. And each of those will be followed with the judges providing some comments on why that blog was selected in the top 3. Then we'll just wrap up with Leonora announcing first, second and third, and wrapping up the general event for today. So I'll pass to Leonora now for some judges' comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evie, and welcome to everybody. And thank you for joining us today. Evie's done a great job of introducing the idea and the motivation for the blog and the writing competition. What I would offer as a broad observation is that, you know, the creation of of the Credible Economist blog and this writing competition is a great illustration of WEN's objectives and WEN's values. One of our key goals is to elevate the voices, the influence and impact, and the recognition of women in economic debate and discussion. For many, many years and many decades, it's been a certain demographic, primarily men, who have dominated economic discussions and debate. And this is about affirming that our female economists and our WEN members have valuable and important contributions, voices, views to make. And we want to set up the mechanisms to give opportunities for those voices to be heard, to continue to develop our WEN members' strengths and capacity in that area, and to recognise and celebrate that contribution. Thank you so much to Evie and Rhiannon for initiating the blog and this writing competition. We received so many great submissions. It was genuinely difficult to arrive at our final selection, and I would like to highlight the fact that we received so many great submissions that have great publication potential on the blog and beyond. So even if we don't mention your submission today, please know that there were excellent articles that were contributed, and would love to support you to still see those articles published. Evie has mentioned the criteria that we used, looking at articles that had a compelling argument, that were clearly communicated, and given that this is all about economics, that we're applying economic concepts, theories, research to inform the reader, to deliver a perspective and to tell a story. And really, as a reader, good articles are about enlightening the reader. So you're prompted to think about something differently, or to learn something new that you didn't know before. That certainly was the case for me when I was reading a lot of these articles. And the author's creativity and clarity, that carries the reader along. Overall, the selection of topics were very broad. They were a pleasure to read, and they were an intelligent application of economics. Evie's mentioned just some of the topics that were covered. I've got a few here that really stood out for me as well. The topics range from organ donations to skilled migration, the value of unpaid care, encouraging part-time work among men, the gendered impacts of climate change, how to improve freight delivery in Australia, the economic value of foreign aid in the Pacific, intergenerational inequality, digital inclusion amongst older women in China. I found that a fascinating read. I learned a lot that I didn't know before. So that's still just a sample of what we read. Some had a very powerful personal story interwoven with the economics. And there was one example of a wonderful personal story of how the COVID pandemic had sparked the author's interest in economics. I personally loved that contribution. It's now my role to acknowledge the 3 honourable mention awards. These are 3 articles who the authors made a wonderful contribution. We have a first, second, third placing, and these were basically the articles that we thought, oh, we'd love to be able to acknowledge them as well. So it's my pleasure to announce them now. So first honourable mention goes to Greta Gordon for her article, Prisoners of the Inflexible Labour Model. This was a great analysis of flexible work using the prisoner's dilemma framework. It was highly original and innovative, and on a topic that has key gender dimensions to it as well. An honourable mention also goes to Malithi Silva for her article, The Economic Role of Unpaid Care in Australia, Why Economists Should Value Wellbeing Instead of Efficiency. This article recognised the importance of unpaid care, and an innovative feature was a focus on intersectionality and how this intersectional dimension needs to be elevated. And an honourable mention to Sabina Albrecht for the article, The Economics of Refugee Resettlement. This article was a consideration of the economic benefits of refugee settlement, which is obviously highly timely, interesting and important. And the article was very well backed by the evidence and the research. Congratulations to all of our authors who have been acknowledged through an honourable mention, and also to all contributions. Thank you very much for participating. Back to you, Evie.
Thank you, Leonora. I think we'll jump straight into the finalists then. So Katie, if you could start and describe your blog and the process of writing it, that would be great.
Sure, Evie. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie, and I wrote my blog about Echnobabble, the enemy of economics. If you don't know what Echnobabble is, don't worry. Echnobabble is actually when, instead of using economics to help highlight our choices and tell us what our options are, we use economics to silence and to convince us there's nothing we can do or there's only one way forward. There are three components of Echnobabble that I talked about. The first is economic jargon. So we can think of economic jargon as when you turn on the TV and you see the Hang Seng Index and you think, I have no idea what that is. And nor does anyone watching the television who isn't getting that, who gets the information from the television. If you are in finance, I'm sure you get that in other ways. So we have economic jargon because it convinces us that we can't have a say on things like climate change or housing if we don't understand Latin phrases or financial indicators. An easy analogy is to think of a doctor speaking to another doctor. They might use economic jargon. But if a doctor was to speak to a patient, or if two people with no medical training were to speak to each other, we wouldn't expect them to use economic jargon. Similarly, when politicians with no economic background speak to the public about using economic jargon, we know they're trying to deceive us. Another form of echnobabble is metaphor. So metaphor appears in our speech a shocking amount every 10 to 20 seconds. And the way people use metaphor really subconsciously influences what we think our options are. For example, if we describe the economy as a god or as a natural force, for example, like trickle-down economics, or then what we're telling us is that nature is best left alone. It's best if we don't intervene. So when we hear those subconscious messages about the economy as nature, we're being convinced that we're powerless. Instead of if we view the economy as a building with where we need to build a good foundation and we need to make structural fixes, etc. The third type of echnobabble that I spoke about was the simple misrepresentation of economic ideas. We can think about when Morrison was asked by Lee Sales, how do you know taxes are bad for the economy? And he replied, that's just simple economics 101. So when people use economic ideas, relying on the fact that most of the public haven't studied economics, to convince them that some things are economic fact, when that's not the case. Why I chose to speak about this issue is because I think economics has an incredible power to do amazing good in society, but it also can be used to shut down issues that we need to address, like climate change and inequality. And so I based this speech off several books I'd read, including a book by Richard Dennis called Echnobabble, that really inspired me to talk about this issue and think about how it affects economic debate. Something I found while writing about it was how it is tricky sometimes to write in really understandable language and really simplify things so everyone can understand them. And I think it would have been, and that's what I was hoping to do. Obviously, it'd be ironic to write an article about how we need simple language and not be able to achieve that. So hopefully I did that. But yeah, I really enjoyed the experience. So very thankful.
Great, thank you, Katie. Leonora and Catherine, any comments on Katie's article? Oh, you're on mute.
Gee, I should have known not to do that after these years of Zooming. I just wanted to say, Katie, I thought it was fantastic, but I have a bias towards this kind of really sort of analysis of how we use language. I'm a writer, so obviously I think that's really important, but as a business and finance writer, I couldn't agree with you more. What I think you did very effectively was translate some of those really quite sophisticated ideas and arguments in quite simple language that I found very easy to access. I love that you started off with the Lee Sales example in your blog. I also got a real sense of your voice. And it's often hard to kind of articulate exactly why that was the case, but I really got a sense of both your passion for what you were talking about, but that real sort of logic about your argument as well. So I thought all of that was done very well. And I did like the way you broke it up. Even though it's not a very long piece, you gave us some idea of the tools or the actual examples. So I think that the metaphor one in particular, I thought was really well put together. So just very nicely written, a nice blend of examples, contemporary examples, and then a broader point. And I think that that always sounds so much simpler than it actually is to do. So well done.
Katie, I would applaud you for the innovation and the originality of your ideas. It was sharply written and it was thought-provoking. So it wasn't just about economic content, but it was about how do we deliver and communicate economic ideas. It prompts us to evaluate and dissect what are we doing to foster economic literacy and inclusion, and the whole concept of empowerment or otherwise through knowledge. I thought it was in some ways sort of a valuable public service for the economics profession to reflect on these key dynamics within our profession, to reflect on our practices of communication and communication as a tool for power, and how do we serve the public through our delivery of economics and the communication of sometimes quite complicated and controversial ideas. I think for readers reading your article, it is thought-provoking as a consumer of economic knowledge, as a consumer of media content. It prompts us to reflect on the source of information, the credibility of information. So I think there are many layers to your article, and it was very thought-provoking and very important as a sort of internal to prompt us to internally reflect on our profession as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. I think it's definitely an article that we can use in our further communications for the blog of what we're hoping from our articles. So awesome work. Next, Louisa. So Louisa wrote about why quotas for women in politics are a good idea according to economics. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you for selecting my article in the top 3 as well. I can't wait to read the other submissions. And I feel very privileged to have been selected by 3 judges whose work I look up to so much as well. And I also really admire WEN as an organisation. So I want to thank the whole team for putting on these events and giving young women in the field these opportunities. So now I'll speak a little bit about the topic of my article. So my article focused on the question of gender quotas for political leadership positions. So I start with the premise that diversity of leadership is now a mainstream idea and already a tangible goal for business and government. So if we take this as a given, the question then becomes, what is the best way to achieve equal representation? And are quotas really the best tool for the job? So gender quotas are inherently more hardline than alternatives like benchmarks or targets because they mandate a behaviour change. Critics of quotas argue that they disrupt meritocracy and may do more harm than good if people believe that a woman was only appointed to the role to fulfil a quota. But I think this argument hinges on the belief that we already live in a meritocracy, which would mean that quotas offer an advantage to women rather than simply levelling the playing field. I build the case in my article that quotas are necessary and useful, at least for the time being, because we know from behavioural economics that heuristics, which are like shortcuts that our brain makes, impede on our decision-making processes, which can lead to gender bias for those in charge of selecting candidates, and also reluctance to run for potential women contenders. So for example, the resemblance heuristic describes the phenomenon of our tendency to over-rely on anecdotal references which we can think of offhand when making judgments. So in cases where examples are scarce, i.e. fewer pre-existing female candidates, those in charge of selection fall back on what they know. So someone who more closely resembles the conventional politician. And this phenomenon also affects potential candidates. When faced with a lack of examples, women may feel discouraged or even convince ourselves that we don't want the position in the first place. So quotas help to remove this mental barrier, and others like it. And also quotas mean improved societal attitudes towards women in leadership roles. In the article, I highlight work done by Pandey and Ford measuring the effects of quota introduction on attitudes towards women as leaders in India. They found that in the short run, the introduction of quotas created some backlash against women, but in the long run, people update their attitudes and perceptions about women based on how the new leaders performed. So overall attitudes towards women in leadership actually improved. So I wrote this article in the lead up to the election, and the question of quotas seemed topical in light of Australia's big experiment. One party has adopted a pre-selection quota in the 90s and the other has not done that. They've just introduced targets instead. So reflecting on the results of the election and the sweep of Teal independent women, I think it's clear that there's definitely a great deal of public appetite for seeing more women in Parliament. What's also interesting in this debate is that the debate often gets caught up trying to prove that women make better leaders or that the presence of women necessarily leads to better decision making. But I think these generalizations are mostly unhelpful as they're empirically unconvincing and tend to rely on trying to find some kind of inherent difference or biological difference between leadership styles. Instead, I believe the burden of proof should really be on the incumbents to argue that the presence of more women will definitively make things worse. And if this cannot be proven, then we should ensure that every gender has equal opportunity. So I hope my article helped to shed some light on the question of quotas, which is a question I think will continue to be debated by political parties and businesses in coming years. So thank you so much again for selecting my article.
Great, thank you, Louisa. And I think, yeah, definitely very interesting, given that you wrote it before the election, to now be able to reflect after and how sort of your findings are strengthened. Catherine, comments?
Well, thank you. I've been writing about this topic on and off for just a few decades. So I was just delighted to see the way that you tackled it, because one of the things I think we do get tied up in knots about, and you've referred to, is it needs to be evidence-based, these arguments, and so much of it's actually been, as you say, when you start out, about this idea, this nebulous idea of merit. And I think what I liked was you unpacked it in a very, very clear way. And I love the way that you looked at heuristics, loss aversion, and so on. And I think that those are all really important factors. The timeliness of it as well, your point about it just being pre-election, I think you could do a follow-up. Now, I think your language was terrific. I like the way that you used variations in sentence length. I like the way that you then pulled us into that central section where you unpacked some of those areas. And I love the example of India, because I've read several references to it, and I think it's such an interesting one. In the corporate world in India, by the way, when they brought in quotas, a lot of the companies there are family owned. So the owner of the company would bring his wife onto the board. So there's always ways of getting around quotas, but the point is, it's not about short term, it's about long term change. And I think you made that point beautifully. I also got, again, a real sense of your opinion. And I think that we have to be really clear what we're talking about here with a blog is different from other forms of writing that you would do. And it's nice to get a bit of the personal in there. So the first person, or this is something I agree with. You don't want to overuse it, but I think it's been, in all of these three examples, been used very cleverly. So congratulations. I think it's a lovely piece.
Thank you so much.
Louisa, I absolutely echo Catherine's points there as well. It's obviously very politically timely and relevant, and this is a moving space. So there's great potential for you to continue to write on this topic, as Catherine has mentioned as well. It's written in a really clear and compelling way, and there are complex ideas in there, and it's quite conversational. So you carry the reader along with you, including little techniques like the use of rhetorical questions that really engage the reader to think internally. Where do they sit on this issue? How can you carry them along to think more deeply about it? It integrates behavioural economic concepts in a really innovative way and quite a fresh way. I agree. I don't think we have seen much of the debate around, or the discussion and analysis of gender equality policies and quotas situated in that behavioural economics framework, like as you have done here, with reference to loss aversion, anchoring effects, heuristics, and other concepts and dynamics that are quite scientifically informed. And you also refer to that need to update attitudes. It's quite a dynamic process. I love the fact that it pushes the conversation beyond just the business case, that women are good for business or good for profit. And you use a really quite challenging technique for the reader in inverting that logic and the burden of proof. So I think the reader comes away thinking, I haven't thought about it like that before. So they come away with something fresh and new. And as part of this broader discussion on gender equality policies, we do need to address and confront sources of resistance and backlash. And your article does a great job of delving into the behavioural and psychological factors that can underpin that at a personal level. As policymakers, as economists, we need to engage with those dynamics in any environment where we're looking to implement policy change. I think there will be a lot of people out there working in the gender equality space and in the diversity and inclusion space more generally, who would really appreciate your article.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. All right, I think we will finish up with Rosie. Last but not least, Rosie wrote about time, blood, and money. Please go ahead.
Great. Yeah, and first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's a great opportunity, like the others have said, and I just had a lot of fun writing this article. Like it was just a great opportunity to kind of have a reason to do something like this that was outside of my day-to-day work. But yeah, a bit of kind of context on this topic for me. So I work in health economics, and I think this topic is an example of what makes work in the health space in economics so interesting. So yeah, it's a little bit of a bit more elusive title than the others, but it is about the market for plasma and incentives for people to donate plasma. And plasma, might be something you're familiar with, or it might not. It's this key medical product that's used for treating burns or brain disorders, tetanus, liver disease, haemophilia, many more. It's a really useful product. It's made out of blood, and it relies on people going in and donating blood, and then the plasma is extracted and you get your blood back. And that means it actually takes a little bit longer than the standard kind of blood donation that you might have done before. And so I first heard about this issue in the US context, and what makes it interesting in the US is that they pay people to donate, which raises some really interesting kind of ethical issues. And the US, actually, they collect so much plasma that they sell it to other countries, and one of them is Australia. And so there's this question, if we're going to become more self-sufficient in terms of our plasma, we need people to donate more plasma in Australia. And how do we do that? So when I looked at this discussion in the Australian context, the dominant kind of policy perspective is we should just pay people. It's as simple as that. If we pay people, more people will donate. And from what I understood, it seemed like there was maybe a bit more nuance to this issue than that. And obviously there are issues from an ethical standpoint. Things like the WHO recommends that you don't do it. It can be more dangerous for individuals and for kind of population health. But I think, economics isn't designed to deal with ethics. What it is designed to deal with is incentives. And the incentives in this case are quite interesting. So a behavioral economics concept you might have heard of is that small financial incentives for something that people would have done altruistically, so out of the kind of good of their heart, can actually discourage some people. And that effect can be particularly powerful for women. And that's a really kind of undesirable outcome. Even if you end up with more people overall donating with a financial incentive, you don't want people turned away from donating. And it can often be people who might have been lifelong donors who are most likely to turn away if these financial incentives are offered. So the suggestion that I make to get people into donation centres and to maintain that feeling they have of altruism draws on another behavioural economics idea that these small frictions can have really huge impacts on people's decision making. And the most common issue, the most common friction that people cite in not donating is they just don't have the time. And so in thinking about what could help people to get into these centres and not take away that feeling of doing good, I thought about the kind of incentives. And I drew a bit on my own experience because my employer actually offers paid blood donation leave, and I went and donated blood as a result of kind of being offered that leave. And then I looked into that more broadly, and there's some pretty strong evidence that this does make a difference. So when paid blood donor leave was offered in Italy, they found that donations rose by around 40%, and that those people, even when the leave went away, maintained a higher frequency of donation. So my suggested solution is that employers be encouraged to offer this leave. And there might be some challenges in kind of encouraging employers to do this, but corporate social responsibility these days is a really big deal. And a couple of hours of leave is probably a worthwhile trade-off. The government could think about kind of providing official commendations for companies to use to kind of legitimize this. So yeah, that's sort of the solution. And I think the core of the issue is that people have this really strong motivation to do something good, but these seemingly quite small barriers get in the way and decrease their likelihood of acting on it. Offering these cash incentives actually doesn't do much to remove those barriers, but actually just in a lot of cases replaces them with these really complex ethical issues that we need to deal with as a society. And yeah, economics and behavioral economics aren't meant to deal with ethics, but what they can tell us about is incentives. And I think in the context of plasma donation, what they're telling us is that small incentives, when they're the right incentives, can save lives. So yeah, that's what I read about. And thank you. Yeah, thanks so much to everyone who was involved in the competition. And yeah, I feel really lucky to have been shortlisted.
Thank you so much, Rosie. It was such an interesting topic and something I didn't know anything about before. So loved reading that one. Catherine, I'll turn to you.
Yes, well, exactly. Not something I ever thought about and didn't think I would necessarily be interested in, but I was, because together was so fascinating. And you used it as such an interesting example as we sit in the middle of a pandemic with so many, conversations around vaccination and flu jabs and so on. So I thought it was really timely. There was something really quite profoundly interesting about making sure that those incentives were the right ones. And your point about monetary and financial incentives not always being adequate, that's fascinating and something that we should keep in mind. And you've also, of course, highlighted that some of those payments in particular turn women off. And again, I think just a generic comment to all of you who entered and who are listening today, please never underestimate how important it is for you to bring your lens as a woman or someone commenting on the effect on women of a whole lot of these areas, policy making and economics. So important to do that. And the obviously part of the rationale for having this competition. But I thought it was great. I thought your language was fantastic. I got, again, a very strong sense of your passion for the topic, but you were very pragmatic about it. And I love the fact that you spent at least half of that blog talking about a solution that you'd come up with. And I think that really practical idea about having leave, also I thought really timely, given how many organisations in Australia are now offering domestic violence leave and other kinds of leave. So we've actually moved on in the workplaces that I'm familiar with around some of those. So I thought not only was it a great idea, I thought the timing of it was terrific. And I really did love your last sentence, which you've just reiterated. If it's the right incentive, it can save lives. I mean, so what you do is you start us on a journey on what could be quite an esoteric topic and leave us with something actually quite profound, which can be applied elsewhere. So thank you. I think you did a fantastic job in such a short number, short length. And that's a tall order. So well done.
Thank you.
Oh yes, Rosie, I found the title really cryptic, but in a good way. It captivates the reader. Is like, what is this about? I'm curious. This sounds curious. I'm going to take a look at this. It's a very sensitive and ethically complex topic that you've delved into, and I think you've defined, the boundaries of economics quite well. Here's what economics can offer as tools for incentives, setting aside the ethical complications of this topic. your narrative really tells a story. It's written like a journey, like you bring in the reader. Your reader is part of the story using, the second person technique there as well. And it makes it really accessible to people who probably haven't thought about this issue before or placed themselves in that position. So you invite them to picture themselves in that scenario and what would work for them. It's really well backed up by the research, as Catherine has said. It's really punchy, you cram a lot in there, but it's really well backed up with references as well. And that reference, or that use and application of behavioural economics concepts and mechanisms, really comes through with reference to, what motivates people for altruistic reasons, and bringing in that human dimension and the gender differences. I think it really makes it memorable. You come to the end of the article and there's some of the pieces that the reader keeps with them and holds on to those kind of new nuggets of information. It's really solution oriented. So you kind of stress test why some of these previous apparent solutions haven't worked. So as Catherine has also said, it's really pragmatic in that way. And it has relevance beyond simply plasma donations, obviously, particularly when we're looking at broader health issues as well. And I love your final line as well. It's about incentives. So all of these are great articles because the economics is in there. The economics is so strong in all of these articles, and it's epitomized in your final line there about economics really is about using incentives, designing the right mechanisms. Why? Because we care about well-being, we care about people's lives. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, just great to hear from each of you about your interest in the topic, and hopefully the comments from the judges also can help with, or provide some tips as well for the rest of the participants on this call when we start the next round of the competition later in the year. Lena, I'll hand back to you to announce the first, second, third.
Yes, which order are we going in? We're starting with
start with 3.
Okay, I just wanted to check that. Want to make sure I've got these in the right order. They're all great. It was so hard for us as judges to split them, really. So, they're all fantastic. So third place goes to Katie McGregor for Econobabble, the enemy of economics. Congratulations, Katie. I think we all have a virtual applause happening in the background.
Thank you so much.
So well deserved. Second place goes to Rosie McCrossan for Time, Blood and Money. Congratulations, Rosie.
Thank you.
And first place, a pleasure to announce, that is Louisa Russell for your article, Why Quotas for Women in Politics Are a Good Idea According to Economics. Congratulations, Louisa.
Thank you so much. This means so much. So thank you so much again. And thanks to the other contestants as well.
Yes, well done to all of you. Evie, do you have anything to say at this point before we wrap up?
No, yeah, I think just reiterating to everyone who submitted, really appreciate the time and effort put into every blog, and we'll be working on over the next few months, sort of publishing as many as possible, starting with the 3 finalists and the honourable mentions. So yeah, really appreciate it and congratulations.
Can I just add, don't stop now. You've started, you've taken a step, and I really hope that you keep writing. All of you, because really it's, as I say, so important to have your voices there and in the fields that you're working in. And it's fantastic for you, but it's fantastic for us as a society to have more women commenting and others commenting on women's issues. So please keep going.
Absolutely. This competition today is just part of a broader journey and ongoing process to keep building your strengths as authors, to inspire others, to gain that feedback from people like Catherine today. So it's part of WEN's overall mission to foster that ongoing professional development as well as those outlets for publication. So to everyone listening in, you'll have a chance to read the blogs when they are published on the Credible Economist website, which you can access through our WEN website. And the other contributions, including the honourable mentions, will be really keen to make sure that we publish those articles, as well as other submissions perhaps that weren't mentioned today, but we think have great value and are important. So all of those participants today, we look forward to being able to facilitate that publication process for you. And as Catherine said, don't stop there, keep going with your writing. I've just got a few closing remarks here, which speak to our participants today, but also to our broader community. The first takeaway message I hope that all of you leave with is that your voice, your views, and your lived experiences matter. Your ideas, your insights, your reflections, they make a valuable contribution to what we would call a rich tapestry of knowledge, debate, and discussion that is part of economics and that does shape our wider society. And having that diversity of ideas that comes from the fact that we have these different backgrounds, these different personal experiences, that adds to the richness of that debate and also the robustness of that debate. So by bringing in your unique experiences, you are making a valuable contribution. So do keep writing, or start writing if there are people tuning in who haven't contemplated it before, and be assured that your views and your voices are needed in the economics profession. This is about broadening that spectrum of voices that are out there so that we can learn from each other and that we can arrive at solutions that have really been robustly evaluated. Second point I'd make is that there are certainly elements that we can use in our writing to enhance the readability, the clarity, the colour and the impact of our writing. And a special thanks to Catherine Fox, who has supported WEN through our professional development sessions to share your journalistic experience and writing expertise with our WEN members in developing their own writing capacity. And this is really important when thinking about reaching that wider audience beyond technical reports or academic papers, which is generally how we spend a lot of our time as economists, but having impact and that sense of fulfillment of getting your message across also means developing skills to extend beyond those narrow sort of publication outputs. At the same time, I would emphasize that everyone has their own communication style. So as Catherine has also highlighted today, don't be afraid to bring your own personal touch to your writing. That can be the magic spark, the unique flavor that sets your writing apart from others. So be true to that authentic voice and experience. Communication is so important for economists, and we can reconcile that and complement that with the unique voices that we bring. And thirdly, I would also send a message of understanding that for many people, the process of writing and particularly making contributions to the media or other broader public forums can be daunting. It can be intimidating. Sometimes you don't know where to start. Sometimes you might write something and you're nervous about how it might be received. We understand that. We understand that. And what we have to remember is that as an economist, we all have a really powerful set of tools. We have data and statistics. We have research and evidence. We have an understanding of economic theories and concepts. So that when you put forward your views and your perspectives, be reassured that you can back it up with what you know, that you have invested in that knowledge, that intelligence, that understanding of the facts and data. So it means that you have less reason to be hesitant about it, and all the more reason to put forward your views and share that with the wider community. To wrap up, I'd like to say thank you to the members of the New South Wales WEN Committee, Evie Fox-Coob and Rhiannon Yetsenga, and also Jai Litherland, who is behind the scenes assisting us with the administration of these events and these initiatives. Thank you to Evie for having the idea in the first place to create the blog and to host it. It's a wonderful example of how WEN has created this outlet for its members. It's an excellent way to share your views, grow your writing skills, and it will open up doors for other opportunities. To everyone tuning in today, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that it's helped to spark added motivation and inspiration amongst you all to keep writing and sharing your voices and sharing your writing with each other. So we want to make sure that WEN is a community where people feel like they can exchange those thoughts and ideas and learn from each other. Please stay connected with WEN. Consider joining up as a member or renewing your membership if you haven't already. You can follow WEN on social media and visit our website to keep updated on events and activities to be involved with. Thank you everyone for your support and keep writing. Thank you.